Sign it, or I burn this house to the ground. My sister stood 10 feet away, gripping a red flare gun like it was a weapon of war, not an emergency signal. But what gutted me worse wasn't the threat. It was the sneer that followed. Dad's gone. Nobody's protecting you now. I didn't even flinch. That same night, she filed court petitions to seize our company and froze my voting rights by telling the board I was mentally unstable. All while smiling for morning news interviews about her troubled sister. But what Lila didn't know was this. I had every word she ever said, every threat, every forged signature, every offshore transfer, documented, time-stamped, sealed. She came with a flare gun, I came with proof. And when the judge sees it, oh, she'll wish she pulled the trigger. My name is Lauren Whitaker, and I'm 45 years old. Every morning, I sit at Father's mahogany desk in our family's corporate offices, surrounded by the systems and protocols he taught me since childhood. His pocket watch ticks beside my untouched tea, while leather-bound ledgers tower like fortress walls around me. My sister Lila, younger by 3 years, hasn't spoken to me since Father praised my diligence at last year's Christmas dinner. Her smile went brittle that night, her champagne glass gripped white-knuckled. Father always insisted we document everything, meeting notes, email trails, handoff logs. I kept mine meticulously filed. Lila called it obsessive and ignored the practice. Now, with Father gone, these archives feel less like habit and more like armor. Grief should soften into peace, but instead, it rattles through this empty house like a warning. But let me start from the beginning. 3 days after the funeral, I sat in Walter Harrison's law office as he read Father's will. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the oriental rug, and the leather chairs creaked with every shift of weight. Walter, Dad's friend and attorney for 30 years, adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat. The estate and controlling interest in Whitaker Industries shall be divided equally between my daughters, Lauren and Lila. Walter's voice carried the same steady tone he'd used in board meetings for decades. Together, they will steward the company's future, guided by the principle that character is the only inheritance that matters. Lila, perched at the edge of her chair, didn't bother hiding her smirk. I kept my face neutral, though my stomach clenched. Equal shares meant equal power, and I knew my sister well enough to fear what that meant. Additionally, Walter continued, both daughters are bound by the company bylaws regarding share, transfers, and board decisions. He glanced at me over his glasses. Your father was very specific about maintaining checks and balances. The drive home felt longer than usual. You know that hollow feeling when you realize everything's about to change? That's what filled my car as dusk settled over the city. I needed something solid to hold on to, so I went straight to Father's study. The share certificates were exactly where they should be. 3rd drawer down, manila folder labeled in his precise handwriting. Next to them sat the board bylaws, dog-eared from years of reference. I was halfway through reviewing the voting procedures when the front door slammed. Lila's heels clicked across the marble foyer. She'd never learned to move quietly, even as a child. Lauren! Her voice echoed up the stairs. We need to talk. I heard her climbing, but nothing prepared me for what burst through the study door. My sister stood there, designer suit pristine as always, but her hand gripped a red flare gun, pointing it straight at me. Sign over your shares, she said. Right now, or else. The chemical smell of the cartridge stung my nostrils. Have you ever noticed how time slows down in moments like these? I could see everything. The slight tremor in her manicured fingers, the wild certainty in her eyes, the way her chest heaved with each breath. Lila, I said, keeping my voice low and steady, put that down before you do something we both regret. Don't patronize me. She jabbed the gun forward. I'm done being the good little sister. Sign the papers, or I'll make sure you regret it. We both know that's not what Father wanted. I forced myself to hold her gaze, even as my heart hammered. Father's dead. She spat the words, and his precious protege is about to learn what real power looks like. You have 24 hours. Her hand shook harder. Sign everything over, or I'll destroy you, starting with this house. I memorized every word, every gesture, the way her voice cracked on destroy, the slight catch in her threat. Details matter when you're dealing with someone desperate enough to threaten family. After she stormed out, I pulled out my laptop and documented everything. Time, exact, words, physical descriptions, the same detailed notes Father had trained me to keep. I saved it with today's date and printed a copy for the safe. Finally, I picked up Father's pocket watch from my desk. The gold case caught the lamplight as I set it atop the stack of ledgers. She thinks I'll break, I whispered to the empty room. She's about to learn otherwise. The watch ticked steadily, marking time just as it had on Father's desk for decades. Each tick reminded me of his voice. Character is the only inheritance that matters. He'd trained me for this, whether he knew it or not. Every system learned, every protocol memorized, every detail documented. They weren't just habits anymore. They were weapons. My sister had made her choice. Now it was time to make mine. The next morning, my heels echoed through the marble lobby of Father's Our company. I'd chosen my navy suit carefully, the one Father always said commanded respect without demanding it. Lila was already there, perched on the edge of a leather chair like she owned it. Sleep well? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Lila, we need to talk about this rationally. I sat across from her, noting how the morning light caught the diamond flashes of her watch, always more expensive than practical. Father built this company to last. He trusted us to protect it, to look after the people who depend on it. Oh, spare me the noble daughter act. She leaned forward, voice dropping. You really think Father's character matters speeches mean anything now? This is business, Lauren. Pure and simple. The business matters. The employees matter. I kept my voice steady, though my throat felt tight. We can run this together, make it even stronger. Let me paint you a picture. Lila cut me off, examining her manicure. First, I'll have my accountants discover some concerning discrepancies in the books. Nothing too obvious, just enough to trigger an audit. Then my lawyers will file motions, request endless documentation, challenge every decision you've ever made. My stomach churned. That's not... Do you know how much corporate lawyers cost per hour, Lauren? How quickly legal fees can drain even a healthy inheritance? She smiled again, all teeth. Sign over your shares now, and we can avoid all that unpleasantness. You'd manufacture false claims just to force me out? The words tasted bitter. I prefer to think of it as leveraging my resources. She stood, smoothing her skirt. 23 hours left on your deadline. Use them wisely. I waited until she'd clicked her way across the lobby before pulling out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to redial twice. Walter, I need your help. His gravelly voice was exactly what I needed to hear. Come to my house. Now. 30 minutes later, I sat in Walter's study, surrounded by leather-bound law books and the comforting smell of pipe tobacco that never quite left his furniture. He'd retired 5 years ago, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Tell me everything, he said, legal pad ready. Start with last night. I walked him through it all. The will. Reading, Lila's flare gun visit, this morning's threats. Walter's pen moved steadily across the yellow paper, his expression growing darker with each detail. She's making 3 critical mistakes, he said finally. First, threatening you with physical harm. Second, attempting to coerce a share transfer through manufactured litigation. Third, he tapped his pen on the desk. She's forgetting who your father really trusted. What do you mean? Your father and I had many conversations about his daughters. Walter pulled open a drawer, extracting a thick folder. He knew Lila's tendencies. That's why the will has specific provisions about board voting rights and share transfers. We need to protect yours immediately. Hope flickered as Walter sketched out our defense. First, we document everything. I want affidavits from anyone who's witnessed Lila's behavior. Second, We gather every board minute, every memo, every email that shows your commitment to the company's welfare. Third, he looked up at me. You said you wrote down the flare gun incident? I nodded, already pulling out my phone. I photographed my notes last night, just in case. Good girl. Walter smiled. Email them to me now. The timestamp will matter. As I watched him build our defense point by point, the knot in my stomach began to ease. This was what Father had prepared me for: attention to detail, documented decisions, protected protocols. Walter set down his pen. Lauren, listen carefully. The time for attempting cooperation is over. Your sister has shown her hand. She'll try to bury you in legal fees while manufacturing cause to force you out. Starting right now, we prepare for war. I thought of Father's words about character being the only inheritance that matters. Looking at the battle plan spread across Walter's desk, I realized he'd left me something else too: a lifetime of lessons in how to fight smart. The next morning, I strode into headquarters ready to start implementing Walter's defense plan. You know that feeling when something's off but you can't quite place it? That's what hit me the moment I stepped into the lobby. Conversations died as I passed, replaced by that peculiar corporate whisper rustle that always signals trouble. Julie from accounting practically jumped when I rounded the corner. Oh, Ms. Whitaker, I didn't expect... Everything all right, Julie? The board. She glanced over her shoulder. There's an emergency session. Started 20 minutes ago. My stomach dropped. Emergency sessions required notification to all board members, and I hadn't received any. Who called it? Your sister. Julie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She's been in there since 8. I quickened my pace toward the boardroom, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. Through the glass walls, I could see Lila standing at the head of the table, gesturing emphatically. The sight reminded me of countless childhood dinners where she'd hold court, spinning tales while I sat quietly documenting everything in my mind. Just as I reached for the door handle, Ted Harrison, our aging board chair, opened it from inside. Ah, Lauren, we were just about to send for you. The room felt wrong. Board members wouldn't meet my eyes. Lila stood with perfect posture, a concerned frown carefully arranged on her face. What's this about? I asked, though I already knew we'd passed some point of no return. Please sit. Ted's voice had that careful tone people use with unpredictable relatives. Your sister has raised some concerns about your recent behavior. Has she? Not a question. I remained standing. Lauren, Lila stepped forward, all sisterly concern. This isn't easy for me. But after your episode with the security footage and these paranoid accusations... What security footage? I kept my voice steady, though my pulse hammered. The guards reported you demanding access to surveillance archives. Lila shook her head sadly. And these elaborate conspiracy theories about me threatening you? Lauren, you need help. I turned to the board. I've run operations for 15 years. Every audit clean, every quarter strong. You know me. We do, Ted said carefully, which is why these recent behaviors are so concerning. The board has passed a motion to temporarily freeze your voting rights pending a full psychological evaluation. The floor seemed to tilt. I gripped the back of a chair, memories flashing of all. The times Father had praised my steadiness, my attention to detail. This is a coordinated attack to seize control. You see? Lila's voice dripped with concern. These paranoid delusions... I moved to table this discussion, Ted interrupted, not unkindly. The freeze is temporary, Lauren. Get some rest. Get evaluated. We'll revisit this when you're feeling more yourself. One by one, they filed out. People who'd known me for years suddenly found the carpet fascinating as they passed. Only Lila met my gaze, her smile small and sharp as a paper cut. Once alone, I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. Thursday, 9:17 a.m. Emergency board session called without notice. Lila addressed board privately before my arrival. Claims made about mental instability. I recorded every detail, every name, every exact quote I could remember. My hands shook as I rode the elevator down to the parking garage. The sound of my footsteps echoed off concrete walls as I called Walter. "They froze my voting rights," I said before he could speak. "Lila convinced them I'm having some kind of breakdown." "Damn." He was silent for a moment. "Lauren, listen carefully. Pull every incident log you can access. Building entry records, security camera footage, visitor logs, especially from the night of the flare gun. Get it all before anything mysteriously expires. On it, I was already mentally mapping which systems I still had access to. What about? My phone buzzed with an incoming email. The official board notice confirming my voting rights were suspended pending psychological evaluation. Subject line: temporary board action. Leadership stability concerns. I read it aloud to Walter, my voice surprisingly calm considering how hard my heart was pounding. "Forward that to me," he said. "And Lauren, don't let them see you sweat. That's exactly what she wants." I ended the call and sat in my car, letting the familiar leather seats ground me. Father's voice echoed in my memory. "Systems exist for a reason, Lauren. Document everything. Tomorrow's victory often hides in yesterday's paperwork." Back at my desk, I dove into the financial dashboards, my usual refuge when the world tilted sideways. "Numbers don't lie," Father always said. "They whisper truth to those patient enough to listen. You know that feeling when something's off but you can't put your finger on it? Like a picture hanging slightly crooked?" That's what caught my attention first, a tiny mismatch in our reconciliation totals. I was cross-referencing our joint operating account when my phone chirped. A standard alert. Unusual activity detected. I almost dismissed it as another false positive. Almost. The withdrawal jumped off the screen, $2.7 million. Exactly half the account balance, down to the penny. My throat went dry as I tracked the transfer path, first to a holding company in Delaware, then through a series of rapid-fire hops that read like Lila's passport stamps. Grand Cayman, Singapore, finally settling in a numbered account in Switzerland. "Clever girl," I muttered, remembering all those business development trips she'd taken last year. While I'd been learning every bolt and beam of the company, she'd been laying groundwork for this. The shell companies were almost funny in their transparency, at least to someone who knew Lila's habits. Azure Horizon LLC, named after her favorite vacation resort. Starling Ventures, matching her college nickname. She'd always had a flair for the dramatic, even in betrayal. I took screenshots of everything, my fingers moving on autopilot while my mind raced. One copy to my secure drive, one to Walter, one printed and dated for the growing paper trail. Walter's response came within minutes. "Check your email. Lila filed seizure petitions this morning. Probate court just set the timeline." The court notice was brief but devastating. 30 days until the final hearing. 30 days before a judge could hand everything, the company, the accounts, Father's legacy, to Lila. I cleared my whiteboard and started mapping it out. Day 0. Today. The drain, the freeze, the clock starting. Day 30. The hearing that could end it all. Between them, a minefield of vendor contracts, payroll obligations, and client relationships that needed immediate attention. Remember how your teachers always said to break big problems into smaller pieces? I channeled that energy now, creating a stabilization checklist. My hand was steady as I wrote each item. The familiar squeak of the marker against the board brought back memories of Father teaching me to plot production schedules, his voice calm and certain. Planning beats panic every time. I took a photo of the completed timeline, then erased and redrew it twice more until it was burned into my memory. The whiteboard went into the supply closet, locked with a key only I held. Last step, setting up the WOW countdown. 30 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes. The timer app on my phone blinked to life, numbers glowing like tiny red accusations. I sat at my desk, watching the minutes tick away. Outside my window, the city lights blurred into a soft haze. The timer clicked past midnight, and day 29 began its march. Time, Father used to say, is the one resource you can never recover. I thought of all the years I'd spent building this company, while Lila planned its dismantling. Of all the family dinners where she'd smiled and schemed. Of every moment I'd trusted when I should have verified. The numbers on my phone continued their relentless countdown. 29 days, 23 hours, 54 minutes remaining. Each second carrying us closer to the moment when a judge's gavel would determine which sister truly inherited father's legacy of character. Next morning hit me like a freight train. 28 days left, and the office felt like walking into quicksand. You ever try to patch a boat while it's sinking? That's what stabilization felt like. I'd mapped out my battle plan over coffee. Shore up vendors first, then payroll, then client communications. Simple enough on paper. But the moment I opened our inventory management system, red flags started waving. 3 of our biggest suppliers showed delivery delays. Odd, since I'd personally confirmed those shipments last week. The purchase orders were there, but the confirmation numbers had vanished. Just poof, gone like they never existed. System glitch, the inventory manager said, not quite meeting my eyes. Been happening a lot lately. Yeah, right. And I'm the Queen of England. I pulled up our master spreadsheet to cross-reference shipping schedules. The file opened fine, then froze. When it finally responded, half the formulas were corrupted. Not randomly. Specifically the ones tracking our most critical supply chains. You know that prickly feeling when you realize you're being played. My neck tensed as I connected the dots. These weren't accidents. This was coordinated sabotage, precise as a surgeon's cuts. I called in Sandra from accounting, watched her fidget as she explained why payroll approvals were mysteriously incomplete. Tommy, in purchasing, stumbled through excuses about missing vendor authorizations. Even reliable old Jim from operations seemed to choose his words too carefully when discussing production delays. "Everything okay, Jim?" I asked, noting how his eyes darted to the door. "Just busy times," he mumbled. The gold watch on his wrist, definitely new, glinted as he hurried out. Busy times indeed. And Lila had been busy with her checkbook, by the looks of it. I documented everything, screenshots, timestamps, system logs, called IT, and had them preserve all workstation histories under their standard retention policy. Even recorded a few conversations on my phone, legal in our state, thankfully. "Build the paper trail," Walter said when I updated him. "Everything copies to me, dated and time-stamped. Chain of custody is crucial." Rain started falling as I left the office, my flats squeaking against marble floors that suddenly felt less solid. The sound followed me home, where I pinned the day's collection of receipts, notes, and timestamps to my whiteboard calendar like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. 27 days and change left. Each hour of sabotage ate into our legal runway like acid through metal. Time we should have spent stabilizing operations was instead spent documenting destruction. I was about to call it a night when a notification popped up. Purchase order approval needed. Routine stuff, except... Wait. The numbers didn't match our standard pricing. I pulled up the vendor history, compared dates. There it was. A 15% markup slipped in last week, authorized by Mark Reynolds. The same Mark Reynolds who Lila had mysteriously promoted to senior manager 3 days ago. The same Mark Reynolds whose signature now authorized millions in inflated payments to a vendor I'd never heard of. My squeaky flats carried me to the whiteboard, where I added another pin, another connection in this web of betrayal. The rain kept falling outside, matching the steady drip of time through our hourglass. I looked at Father's pocket watch, still ticking away on my desk. "Character shows in the details," he used to say. Well, these details were showing plenty of character, just not the kind he'd hoped for. The morning, news hit harder than my alarm clock. There it was, splashed across my tablet screen in bold type. "True heir saves father's firm." I nearly choked on my coffee. You know that surreal moment when you're reading about yourself, but it's like looking in a funhouse mirror? That was this. I clicked through to the video segment. There sat Lila on Wake Up Metro, all understated black dress and carefully smudged mascara. Picture perfect grief, served, with a side of character assassination. It's been so difficult, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Watching the company Dad built, struggling under uncertain leadership. Sometimes love means making hard choices to protect what matters. The host nodded sympathetically. There have been concerns raised about current management decisions? I hate discussing family matters publicly. Lila's voice cracked on cue. But when mental health issues affect business judgment, well, we owe it to our employees to ensure stability. My coffee went cold as I watched her performance. The same sister who'd threatened me with a flare gun was now playing concerned savior on morning television. Ever watch someone rewrite your life story while you sit helpless? It twists your gut in ways I can't describe. I met Walter at the courthouse by 9. His office had worked through the night preparing, our responsive motions, each backed by documented irregularities we'd uncovered. The sabotaged inventory records, the corrupted spreadsheets, the suspicious vendor markups, all of it meticulously time-stamped and cross-referenced. "Fair warning," Walter said as we climbed the courthouse steps. "Lila's legal team filed another 100 pages this morning. They're trying to bury us in paper." Inside, the clerk's office smelled of dust and disappointment. We submitted our affidavits from loyal clients, each attachment wrapped in chain of custody logs that proved when and how we'd gathered the evidence. The clerk stamped them mechanically, thud, thud, thud. Each sound felt like a clock ticking down. "Will anyone actually read these?" I whispered to Walter. He squeezed my shoulder. "That's why we make the important parts impossible to miss." Stepping outside, I walked straight into a camera lens. The reporter thrust a microphone at my face, firing questions about Lila's allegations. My navy suit suddenly felt like armor. "The truth," I said clearly, looking directly into the camera, "will be presented in court, where facts matter more than television appearances." Back home, I spread our filings across my dining room table. Father's old mahogany surface disappeared under color-coded binders. Red for financial evidence, blue for operational documents, green for witness statements. The organization soothed me somehow. Like Father always said, control what you can control. Remember how I mentioned those detailed logs I'd kept over the years? They filled 3 of those binders. Every email, every meeting note, every system access timestamp, all preserved despite Lila's dismissal of such obsessive record-keeping. The memory of her mockery brought a thin smile to my lips. My phone buzzed around midnight. Walter's text made my stomach clench. "We are heard next week, but the stack against us is high." I sat there in my quiet house, surrounded by rainbow-colored proof of my sister's betrayal, and thought about Father's watch ticking away in the other room. The sound had always meant precision to me, reliability. Now it just measured the distance between truth and justice. I stared at the binders, each tab and highlight representing another piece of evidence that might or might not matter. The red ones tracked money, the blue ones tracked operations, and the green ones tracked people. But would any of them track high enough to overcome Lila's legal mountain? The reporter's camera flash kept replaying in my mind, along with Lila's performance on that morning show. Here I was with facts and figures, while she played the public like a violin. 26 days left until the hearing. The weight of those binders felt heavier by the minute. The next morning, I met Walter at his home office before the sun was up. The place smelled like coffee and old leather, with law books lining every wall like soldiers standing guard. You know that feeling when you're running out of options but can't afford to show it? That was us, hunched over Father's will, like it might suddenly speak a new language. "We're missing something," Walter muttered, adjusting his reading glasses. "Your father never left things to chance. Everything had a backup plan." The morning light crept through his Venetian blinds as we dissected each paragraph. I could almost hear Father's voice in the formal language, that precise way he had of laying out expectations. My tea went cold beside me, forgotten as Walter's finger traced each line. "Wait!" His hand stopped so, suddenly, it made me jump. "Look at this subsection, the character clause." I leaned in, squinting at the dense text we'd all skimmed past during the initial reading. My heart nearly stopped as the words came into focus. Should either daughter be proven dishonest in matters relating to this inheritance through court proceedings, her entire share shall be forfeit to the other party. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. Walter, are you saying, if we can prove Lila's actions in court, the threats, the offshore accounts, the coercion, she loses everything? His gravelly voice held a note of triumph. Your father built in a failsafe against exactly this kind of behavior. The room seemed to fill with oxygen I hadn't realized was missing. Every document we'd gathered, every timestamp we'd preserved, suddenly carried new weight. They weren't just defense anymore. They were ammunition. Here's what we have, I said, spreading our evidence files across his desk. The offshore transfer records, which prove financial dishonesty, Walter nodded. The emails showing her bribing managers, internal coercion documented, and my note about the flare gun threat, time-stamped that night, weaponized intimidation. Walter was already reaching for his legal pad. We don't just need to defend anymore. We need to prove deliberate deception. Remember that whiteboard calendar in my office closet? I pulled up a photo of it on my phone, marking the hearing date with a bright red star. What had felt like a countdown to disaster now looked like a target on a range. Walter started drafting subpoenas. We'll need formal testimony from those account custodians and complete IT logs showing system access patterns. Can she fight this clause? I asked, watching him. Right. He glanced up at me over his glasses. She can try, but your father's language is airtight. He knew exactly what he was doing. I sat back, feeling the weight of father's foresight. All those years of teaching us about character, about keeping detailed records, he'd built a trap door right into the inheritance. Any daughter who betrayed his principles would lose everything. Truth has a cost, Walter said, sliding the subpoena drafts across his desk, but fraud has a bill. Looking at those papers, I remembered something father told me once while reviewing quarterly reports. Numbers don't lie, Lauren. People do. Always trust the paper trail. At the time, it seemed like just another business lesson. Now I understood it was a warning. The morning sun had fully breached Walter's blinds, throwing stripes of light across our evidence files. Each folder contained another piece of Lila's undoing, waiting to be revealed in court. My sister had gambled everything on the assumption that I would break under pressure, that my obsessive record-keeping was just another sign of instability. She hadn't counted on father building an ethical ejector seat right into his will, or on me having the documentation to activate it. I gathered the subpoena drafts with steady hands, 25 days until the hearing. But for the first time since this started, I wasn't counting down. I was counting ammunition. The digital numbers on my phone hit me like a slap. 10 days. 10 measly days until the hearing that would decide everything. You ever have one of those moments where exhaustion just hollows you out? That's where I was, sitting at my dining room table at 3 a.m, staring at settlement papers Lila's lawyers had couriered over. The house felt different in those pre-dawn hours. Shadows pooled in corners where father's photographs used to hang. I'd packed them away after the funeral, couldn't bear their eyes on me. The only sound was that damn pocket watch ticking away on the sideboard, marking time like a metronome of doubt. My hand shook as I reached for the pen. Would it be so terrible to just give in? Sign the papers, take the settlement, walk away with enough to start over somewhere quiet? The numbers on the offer weren't completely insulting. I could probably keep my house, even if I had to refinance. But the employees, God, the employees, hundreds of families who'd trusted father's promise of stability. And our clients, some who'd been with us since I was a teenager, learning the ropes in accounting while father taught me about relationship capital. All of them would be casualties of Lila's slash-and-burn exit strategy. Remember how your parents would catch you doing something wrong, and their disappointment hurt worse than any punishment? That's how these settlement papers felt, like I was letting everyone down just by considering them. My fingers trembled as I dialed Walter's number. It was obscenely late, but he answered on the second ring. Must have known I'd crack eventually. "I can't sleep," I whispered, voice barely there. The settlement papers came. "Lauren, just my name," but waited with understanding. "What if we lose, Walter? What if the judge doesn't care about all our evidence? I could lose everything. The house, the employees' jobs, client relationships, built over decades." My throat closed up. Maybe I should just sign. The silence stretched long enough that I checked if the call had dropped. Then his voice came back, granite solid. "Your father used to say, 'Character is the only inheritance that matters.' You sign those papers, you're not just giving away assets, you're burying your character right alongside them." The truth of it hit me like cold water. I could almost smell Father's office, leather and coffee and that fancy pen ink he imported from Germany. He wouldn't have wavered. Not for a second. "You're right." I grabbed the settlement offer and fed it through the shredder, listening to the satisfying whir as it turned to confetti. To hell with signing, let's build a trap instead. I pulled out fresh paper and started sketching, energy flowing back into my veins. First, we authenticate every bank transfer record. Get sworn statements from the offshore account managers. "Good," Walter encouraged. "What else?" "Handwriting analysis on those forged signatures from the board documents. And," I paused, remembering something crucial. "Walter, Lila sent an email threatening me right after that flare gun incident. It's got to still be in the server archives." "That's the smoking gun we need, literally." His chuckle was grim. "Can you get it?" "IT keeps everything for 7 years. I just need to submit the right request form." I was already pulling up the template on my laptop. "And Walter, let's get every single witness prepped at dawn. No surprises. I'll book the conference room, and we should have a notary on standby for declarations." "Book 2, I said. "I want redundancy on every sworn statement." The sky was lightening to pewter by the time we finished plotting. I set 3 alarms on my phone, labeling them with words that felt like anchors. Proof, presence, patience. You know what's funny? That pocket watch of Father's was still ticking away, but it didn't sound like doubt anymore. It sounded like a countdown to justice. I walked to the kitchen to start coffee, my steps steady for the first time in days. The settlement papers lay in shreds in my wastebasket, a fitting grave for momentary weakness. 10 days suddenly felt less like a deadline and more like a runway. Just enough time to set every piece of our trap perfectly. Morning hit like a hammer after the late night, but I was already wide awake when Walter's text buzzed. "War room ready. Bring coffee." Ever notice how the most important days of your life often start with something mundane, like picking up coffee for a meeting where you're about to change everything? The barista even drew a little heart in my latte foam, totally clueless that I was carrying ammunition, not just caffeine. I found Walter in the conference room, surrounded by stacks of papers that would have made Father proud. His reading glasses were already smudged from flipping pages. "Let's start with the money trail," he said, accepting his coffee. "Bank statements first." We spread the documents across the table like playing cards. Each certified statement showed Lila's fingerprints, transfer authorizations, routing numbers, timestamps that matched her passport stamps. The offshore accounts formed a constellation of greed, each one carefully masked behind shell companies. "Look at this pattern," I said, tapping dates with my pen. She was setting these up months before Father died, while he was still in hospice. Walter's jaw tightened. "The judge will see the premeditation. Next, we need the custodian letters." The letters came from bank officers, each one notarized and crystal clear about timing. They confirmed exactly when Lila accessed which accounts, down to the minute. No wiggle room, no plausible deniability. "Now the forensics on those board signatures," Walter prompted. I pulled out the expert's analysis. 3 signatures Lila had forged on critical board documents, the strokes, pressure points, and ink composition all documented in painful detail. The expert's conclusion was unequivocal. Deliberate forgery, not some innocent mistake. But this, I said, opening my laptop, this is the crown jewel. The email from Lila popped up, preserved in the company's server backups exactly as IT had promised. The timestamp matched the night she showed up with the flare gun. Her words glowed on the screen. "Sign over the inheritance or next time I won't just wave it around." "Header information intact?" Walter asked. "Complete chain of custody, server logs, backup records, authentication stamps, it's bulletproof." We spent the next hours rehearsing my testimony. Walter played judge while I walked through the timeline. Lila's initial threats, the offshore transfers, the forged documents, the coordinated sabotage. No emotion, no flourishes, just facts lined up like dominoes. "Good," Walter said after my third run-through. "You're not editorializing. Let the evidence speak for itself." I labeled every exhibit with color-coded tabs, blue for banking, red for forensics, yellow for emails. Then I made duplicate sets, one for the judge's chambers, one for the clerk, one for opposing counsel. Father always said details win wars. You know that satisfaction of finishing a huge project? That's how I felt loading the last box into my car at dusk. Everything organized, everything authenticated, everything ready. That feeling lasted until I pulled into my driveway and spotted the reporter lounging against my mailbox. Channel 7 badge, camera ready. "Ms. Whitaker, care to comment on allegations that—" No comment. I kept my voice neutral, keys steady in the lock. "Please respect private property." Inside, I dropped my briefcase and went straight to rechecking exhibit numbers. One missing tab could derail everything. The numbers started blurring around midnight, but I kept going until my phone chirped. The Countdown app flashed its update. 3 days, 3 days, 72 hours until we'd either save everything or lose it all. I picked up the next exhibit folder, squinted my eyes clear, and started checking numbers again. The morning of the hearing, I stood in the courthouse bathroom, straightening my navy suit jacket for the 10th time. You'd think after 20 years of business meetings, I'd be immune to nerves. But this wasn't just another meeting. This was the day everything would either come together or fall apart. Remember what I said about important days starting with ordinary moments? Well, watching a courthouse. Security guard yawn while waving his metal detector wand around my briefcase definitely qualified. Even the squeaky wheels of our evidence cart seemed determined to keep things mundane. Walter met me at the courtroom doors, his tie perfectly straight, his game face on. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." I gripped the handle of our evidence cart. "How's the gallery looking?" "Packed. Every news outlet in the county looks like." He wasn't exaggerating. When those heavy doors swung open, I counted at least 6 camera crews, their lenses following us like hunting dogs as we made our way to the plaintiff's table. The wooden bench creaked under the weight of our binders and exhibits. Lila sat across the aisle, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car. She didn't look my way once. You know that moment before a storm hits? When the air gets thick and everything goes quiet? That's exactly how it felt when the bailiff called us to order. Lila's lead counsel rose first, Thomas Reed, one of those silver-haired types who probably practiced his courtroom voice in the shower. He painted quite a picture. Poor Lila, the dedicated sister, forced to step in and save our father's legacy from my erratic leadership. "The evidence will show," Reed declared, gesturing to the stack of newspaper articles he'd arranged just so, that Ms. Lauren Whitaker's instability threatened the very foundation of this company. I kept my face neutral, the way Father taught me during tough negotiations. Just watched Reed wave those headlines around like they were gospel truth instead of paid-for hit pieces. When Walter squeezed my arm, I knew it was time. The clerk swore me in, and I settled into the witness chair, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Focus on the facts. Let the evidence do the work. "Ms. Whitaker," Walter began, "please walk us through the events following your father's passing." I started with the will reading, my voice steady as I laid out the even split, the board freeze, the systematic sabotage we'd documented, each point connected to the next like links in a chain. "And the company's finances during this period?" Walter prompted. Yes, I nodded to the clerk. If you could display Exhibit A. The certified bank statements appeared on the courtroom screen, each transfer highlighted in yellow. These records show systematic withdrawals to offshore accounts, beginning while our father was still in hospice care. I watched Lila's jaw tighten as I walked through the timestamps. Each date aligned perfectly with her public statements about securing the company's future. The custodian letters in Exhibit B confirm the exact timing of account. Access, I continued, watching the clerk pull up each document. As you can see, these transfers required physical presence at specific branches. Lila's attorney started scribbling furiously. He knew what was coming. And now, Walter said, I'd like to address the matter of threats. My heart thumped once, hard. This was it. Clerk, please display Exhibit C. The email filled the screen, Lila's words stark against the white background. Sign. Over the inheritance, or next time, I won't just wave it around. The gallery's collective intake of breath was audible. One of the reporters actually dropped his pen. The judge, who'd been taking notes throughout, suddenly looked up. Counsel, is this email authenticated? Yes, Your Honor, Walter replied. Full header information and server logs are included in the exhibit. I see. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp. And the signature, analysis you referenced? Exhibit D? As the clerk pulled up the forensic report, I caught Lila's face going pale. She knew as well as I did, this wasn't just about losing control anymore. This was about getting caught. Your Honor, if I may direct your attention to the signature comparisons, I said, watching the forensic report fill the screen. The document showed known samples of Lila's handwriting side by side with signatures from recent board resolutions. Ever notice how the truth has its own kind of weight? You can feel it settle into a room. The analysis highlights 17 points of similarity, I continued, my voice steady. Pressure points, letter formation, and distinctive hooks that match Lila's known signature pattern, particularly in the lowercase L and trailing A. The forensic examiner had marked each matching characteristic in red. Even from where I sat, I could see Lila's attorneys shuffling papers, probably searching for some procedural objection to block what was coming next. And why, Walter asked, are these signatures relevant to the inheritance? This was the moment we'd prepared for. I reached for the will document, turned to the marked page, and read aloud. Should either daughter be proven to have acted dishonestly in matters before this court, her share of the inheritance shall be forfeited in its entirety. The gallery erupted in whispers. I felt the room tilt as the full impact landed. This wasn't just about splitting assets anymore. This was about Lila losing everything. Let me be clear, the judge interrupted, leaning forward. You're invoking the character clause? Yes, Your Honor, Walter replied, based on documented fraud, coercion, and threats. Lila's lead counsel shot to his feet. Your Honor, we request time. To review these allegations, you've had weeks to review our filings, Walter countered. The evidence speaks for itself. The judge raised her hand for silence. I'm calling a 10-minute recess to review the clause and supporting documentation. Court will resume at 11:40. The bailiffs all rise, barely registered as I stepped down from the witness box. Walter guided me to a bench in the hallway, where I could finally let out the breath I'd been holding. You did exactly what you needed to do, he murmured. Clean, clear, and documented. Those 10 minutes stretched like taffy. I watched attorneys from both sides pace the corridor, their shoes clicking against marble. The courthouse clock ticked so loud I could hear it through the walls, reminded me of Father's pocket watch somehow. When we filed back in, the tension had my skin prickling. The judge settled into her chair, arranged her notes, and looked straight at Lila. Having reviewed the evidence presented, I find clear and convincing proof of dishonesty before this court. The forfeiture clause is hereby triggered. She lifted her gavel. Ms. Lila Whitaker's share of the inheritance is revoked, effective immediately. The crack of wood on wood echoed through the suddenly silent room. I watched Lila's face drain of color as the ruling sank in. Everything she'd schemed, forgone in a single stroke. Cameras started clicking like crickets as I gathered our exhibits. Walter's hand found my shoulder and squeezed once, our signal for mission accomplished. We made our way through the crowd toward the courthouse steps, where a wall of reporters waited. Their energy had shifted, no longer circling for scandal, but hungry for vindication. A producer in a charcoal suit pushed forward. "Ms. Whitaker, the public needs to hear your side. Statement now, or the narrative writes itself." I looked at the forest of microphones thrust toward my face, each one ready to carry my words to thousands of listeners who'd been fed Lila's lies for weeks. I stepped to the microphone bank, letting the courthouse columns frame the moment. Funny how clarity feels after weeks of chaos, like finally breaking through storm clouds into clean, quiet air. "The court's ruling today confirms what document trails have shown," I began, my voice carrying across the steps. "Unauthorized transfers to offshore accounts, forged signatures on board resolutions, and yes, a documented threat involving a flare gun, which the court has now authenticated." Ever notice how quickly a crowd can shift? Like water finding its own level. Reporters swung their cameras toward Lila, who stood rigid beside her publicist. The questions started like sparks catching dry timber. "Ms. Lila Whitaker, how do you respond to evidence of forgery? Can you address the offshore transfers? Was there really a flare gun threat?" Her publicist's mouth opened and closed without sound. I'd seen that look before. The moment a professional realizes their client lied to them too. My phone buzzed with incoming alerts. Headlines were already morphing on news sites. Heir stripped of inheritance after fraud. Exposed. Family fortune fight ends in forensic revelation. Board to review emergency actions after court finding. Lila's carefully cultivated image was unraveling in real time. A board member I recognized slipped away from the crowd, already on his phone. Two major clients who'd been watching from the sidelines started texting their account managers. The sponsorship director from a charity where Lila sat on the board quietly deleted something from her tablet. "The evidence speaks for itself," I continued, keeping my tone measured. "Bank records don't lie, signature analysis doesn't lie, and server logs don't lie." More questions flew, but now they focused on consequences. Will criminal charges be considered? How many board votes were compromised? What about the charitable organizations? I watched Lila's world contract. Her publicist whispered something urgent, tugging her sleeve. A photographer who'd been friendly to her for weeks now angled for reaction shots. The crowd that had gathered to witness her triumph was instead documenting her collapse. Without thinking, my hand slipped into my jacket pocket, fingers finding the familiar shape that had steadied me through all of this. I drew out Father's pocket watch, its brass case catching the late afternoon sun. The weight settled into my palm. Not heavy, just substantial, real. Remember what I said about truth having its own kind of weight? This was exactly that. I held up the watch, letting the light play across its face. "My father left us more than just assets," I said. "He left us a standard to live by, a commitment to honest dealings and careful stewardship." The cameras focused on the watch, recognizing a symbol when they saw one. Light glinted off the crystal like a signal mirror. "This watch," I continued, "kept perfect time through 50 years of business decisions. It never ran fast to chase profits. It never ran slow to hide mistakes. It just marked honest hours, one tick at a time. You could have heard a feather drop on those courthouse steps. Even the camera shutters seemed to pause. And that's how we'll rebuild," I said. "One honest hour at a time." I lifted the watch closer to the microphones, its steady tick faint but clear, in the sudden quiet. Lila's publicist was now physically steering her toward a waiting car, but the damage was complete. She'd lost more than inheritance today. She'd lost credibility, connection, and any claim to Father's legacy. Looking straight into the nearest camera, I delivered the line that would close this chapter. Greed always destroys itself. The words landed like a judge's gavel. Final. Undeniable. Done. Because sometimes karma isn't about revenge. Sometimes it's just about truth finding its level, like water always does, and watching nature take its course.